Ambassador Ayub, thank you very much for your presentation. In fact, we share your optimism that 21st century should be the Asian century, but of course it's a challenge in front of us that how to get there. And of course, you mentioned about the regional cooperation deficit, so to say, in SAARC efforts. Of course, I don't necessarily share that view. I think SAARC has done fairly well. We set up in 1985, and today we have achieved certain benchmarks. But of course, there's more to be done. If you look at similar organizations, let's say ASEAN or EU, it has taken much longer time to get to where they are. So we are still, in that sense, little young organization. But I share the view we can go fast so that we don't have to wait for things to happen. But of course, SAARC essentially India as the central nation in the SAARC it goes without saying India's leadership becomes very important for SAARC for it to succeed. Energy sector cooperation is something you mentioned, and which is also another issue, another area where I think SAARC nation should cooperate, because there's a lot of potential for that given the rate of economic growth in the region in the SAARC. And whereas some countries have great potential for energy production, while others have the great potential for consume. So there's a complementarity in that. Um, of course, you mentioned about the challenges for economic integration, and and the need for economic integration is, of course, is self-evident. And what challenges are there in terms of how to balance with regard to certain national prerogatives such as food security versus how to link up in the modern globalizing world. And now, of course, I know you are hungry, but perhaps we need to give time for us to have a good interaction. And before I open the floor, I just want to leave one thought in your mind as very important for, I think, all countries represented in this region. That is, for regional stability, it's very important that we do not encourage extremism of any form, either ethnic or religious. Extremism is a destabilizing factor for our region. And sometimes there is ethnic nationalism, which is also a form of extremism. And that is not the grain of our region. If you look at the times before the colonial powers control our region, if you look at a map of the region, uh, any regional map which includes India, the division of states or entities were not dependent on ethnicity or religion. It was only a power structure of the reigning kings. Whereas this ethnic-based demarcation is something that was introduced from external factors, not indigenous. So we should not go that road, because we should create a kind of more integrated multi-ethnic regions within and intra. So that's one factor that will add stability to our region, and most of our sectarian issues, most of our separate issues will vanish if we can adopt the kind of philosophy that our kings of the Yo adopted, that is that it's without having any separatism in the minds of people. So with that thought, I just want to open the floor for your questions. You can ask any of us any questions, and we'll try to answer as long as you can stay a little hungry. Thank you. If you can introduce yourself, it will be great.
Thank you. My name is Indira Lopez. I'm the HRG Affairs of the Cuban Embassy, but here I would like to little place a comment as a member of the University of Havana in Cuba, which I have a PhD in political science. In 1991, in the Central American, took the place as a conference with all the armies in the region, basically the countries which called as ALBA. In there was an analysis of the two parallel processes of peace after conflicts with Guatemala, for example, and Nicaragua. There was placed that the packet of health that bring it from countries who take there as a facilitators, place the focus in the troops and the army, as they will remain as armies forever. But when there is a question that you have a number of men in weapons when you are in a conflict, but when you are going to a peace, a positive peace, these people has to be reduced in any ways. So most of the packets who comes to a country with in conflict take in mind that the people will remain the same body integral as it is. But then when this started the mobilization process, appears phenomena like the criminalization discipline that is involved in all kinds of traffics. For example, because it's a body who is going to demobilize, follows the same line of discipline, and they repeat this organization in order to commit crimes. So you have a notable increasing in what is drug, human traffic, and involved in violence in politics. The second element that was there placed is the social elements of the peace process, because everybody think that this process will be demobilized or will be parallel to the normal development process. That is, how to involve this in a construction on an infrastructure building for economic in the region there was some instances of violence, and the collateral damage, for example, the topics of genres, the land distribution, the so-called the elements to incorporate the women as a productive forces that you don't consider when you are in the peace process as a packet health. So I would like to place this because as I was reading for Madam Maria, I would like just to place a question, is in those dialogue on measures for peace, it is considered the elements of how the armies and the collateral elements of the society is prepared for the peace. What will be my role when I got in peace? Because definitely the package of the health camps, how to demobilize, but not what you are going to do when you are going to peace. That's it.
If I understood your questions correctly, in terms of such interventions giving way to various other non-state actors and other spoilers, and how you manage those spoilers after the international community withdraws. In Afghanistan, in 2001, we had the Taliban regime, which was toppled, and then reemerged 2-3 years later. That was one spoiler, but in Afghanistan, over the last decade, a multitude of spoilers have emerged. Subnational power brokers, what we call tier 1, tier 2 warlords, drug traffickers, and other criminal networks that sort of feed off the war. Furthermore, some of these have actually been sustained by the international community to indirect funding channels. For instance, to secure a certain area in Afghanistan, sometimes NATO, through other contractors, as well as other members of the international community, would pay off certain individuals to maintain security in this area. Now, the individuals that were provided these funds were these spoilers. And so after these groups do leave, the Taliban only will be one of many, many groups that the Afghan government will have to tackle. Also, in the last few years, one thing that has received absolutely no attention has been the crime rate in Afghanistan, which in the last 6 months has drastically increased in Kabul alone. With the presidential elections and the uncertainty, and with it has led a lot of people to basically take advantage of these opportunities, of these pockets of instability. So it will be a very serious problem and there's been so many ineffective disarmament programs in Afghanistan that it is also a country that is fully armed as well.
High Commissioner, Excellency Yash Sinha.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, may I like to congratulate all the panelists, including you, for very succinctly putting across your viewpoints. I have a comment and a query. The comment is relating to Ms. Mariam Safi's presentation. You mentioned about the various conferences, Tokyo in particular, and you mentioned about 50% of the aid being channeled to the government. And you also said that donor control over aid. So I'd just like to clarify that as far as India is concerned, 100% of the $2 billion committed goes to the government of Afghanistan. And India is a major donor, as you're aware. The second thing, having been myself present at Bonn and London, in Istanbul, in Kabul, and of course Tokyo, I'd also like to ask one aspect where you, I think, did not, you talked about regional cooperation, but you didn't talk about the Heart of Asia process. If you could tell us what is the latest on that, having been myself away from the action for the last 14 months. And a second question, if I may, to either Ambassador Ayub or to you, on the fate of the TAPI, the pipeline. We talked about, Ambassador Ayub talked about energy, grids and connectivity. The latest status of TAPI, if you could enlighten us on what the status is. Thank you.
To answer your question on the Heart of Asia efforts, over the last few years, and especially with the support of the U.S., as they have made this a really significant pillar post-2014, has been the initiative of reviving the Silk Road process and ensuring that Afghanistan becomes central to this. In light of this process, so far, Afghanistan has been working to develop its own infrastructure. So one of the main things that Afghanistan lacked in 2001 and continues to lack is railway roads. Afghanistan has the capacity to be connected through regional highways through all of the countries that surround it, and this is a huge resource for it to enable it from resources to come from the east towards the west and west east. So in this process, we've also signed various agreements, like for example you mentioned TAPI. There's also APTA, which has also been the trade agreement that we signed with Pakistan. And in terms of these efforts, progress has continued. But what's preventing these agreements from truly being implemented is the lack of mistrust that continues between Afghanistan and its regional neighbors, particularly, I would say, Pakistan and Iran. With Pakistan in particular, you have various scenarios where you have border closures for months at a time, and we've witnessed this in the recent past. Also, local exports and businesses have a very difficult time when you have sort of these border closures. You have goods standing there and being wasted. We also have a lot of other issues between the countries that don't allow these policies to be implemented. And so in terms of these initiatives, for the Silk Road Initiative to be actually realized in the future, and we are on the road for that, despite the various factors that Afghanistan has initiated for growth, this has been one factor that actual strategy has been created for. And so for all the stakeholders in the region are on board. And so pipelines have been established, railway networks connecting Afghanistan and Pakistan are currently in the process of being established. Railway network connecting Afghanistan to Iran has been established. Also international highway that allows goods from Afghanistan to go to Iran and from there to India and elsewhere have also been. Railway networks that connect Afghanistan to Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan are also in the process. Right now, Afghanistan has also concluded its ring road that connects all of its provinces internally, and then connecting from that to regional countries. Highways have also been some have been established, some are currently in the process. So in order to facilitate its role on the Silk Road Initiative, these processes are leading the way. But the issues amongst Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, if I may say, is where we're having a lot of difficulty. And unless these issues between these three countries get resolved, you will not see the realization of this Silk Road Initiative.
Thank you. Well, as you were together in Islamabad in the early 90s, and I was DG Central Asia, and I'm very skeptical about this project because at that time we were discussing it and we signed the first MOU, and now we're about 25 years in the future and we're still discussing it and signing MOUs. Every new government which comes into Pakistan's first thing to do is sign a MOU regarding TAPI. But we still do not have the pricing, either pricing from Turkmenistan or pricing for transit from Afghanistan, or our pricing or your pricing. And we still do not know if the gas is there or not, because the Turkmens refuse to allow international verification. So until these two problems are resolved, I would, for one, be very skeptical. And of course, the worst thing is the entire route is completely insecure.
Thank you. Sir, you have the floor.
Mr. Subha Chandran. So you mentioned briefly case of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir in India. So I would like to ask if you can elaborate more on this example in order to draw some lessons that could be of value to the Sri Lankan case, because India has to some extent developed this strategy to deliver peace in Kashmir and mitigate some separatist movements by the way of providing development. And so far, this has probably provided mixed results. So if you can comment on this, your lessons from Kashmir, what could be of help here in Sri Lankan case? And then secondly, briefly, just to short question to Ms. Arifi, Maria. I haven't, one can have an impression that the international community is the only responsible for the current affairs in Afghanistan. But I would like to ask you if you can elaborate also on possible failures and mistakes done by domestic actors, whether some lacks in political process or good governance or whatever, unwillingness to cooperate, to reconciliate, to tackle the ethnic differences also. I don't know if you can find or give us a few examples, what were the major domestic problems that made that Afghanistan is where it is today. Thank you very much.
Quickly on the J&K experience, the way that the conflict was handled in J&K is slightly different from how it was handled in other places. Also because how the other side responded to the conflict. Unlike in other parts, if you have noticed, it was not as violent as it happened in the case of Sri Lanka. For example, the militant groups never let a moderate leadership to remain in place. Whereas in J&K, there, along with the militant groups, there was always a group of separatists and a set of moderate leadership. So the government, on the one hand, while fighting insurgency, was also kind of engaging the political forces in a political way. So it was a kind of a two-level or even a three-level process. On the one hand, there was violence being fought by the military and the paramilitary, and on the other hand, there was a political engagement continuously. Despite the high level of violence, the state could continue the democratic process, and to an extent, the society led that process to continue, though some of the elections were highly questionable by the local people. They did take part in those electoral process. So the big experience, if I have the big lesson that if I have to bring from a J&K experience is the allowance of the moderate leadership by the state and the militant groups, and the engagement of that same moderate leadership, and the continuation of the democratic process on the one hand while fighting insurgency on the other hand, And the third is the larger engagement of the multiple civil society actors on a continuous basis. There was at no point of time, no point of the conflict, there was a continuous rupture between the state and the society. So there was a continuous engagement. If you ask me, that would be some of the lessons that I could say from J&K experience.
The Afghan government has so many challenges, I don't know where to begin. The problems that we're facing currently, yes, in many part, this was something that that was caused by the foundation that was laid in Afghanistan in the early part of the intervention, which was from 2001 till about 2006. At that point in time, there was many opportunities to be able to create possibly a different Afghanistan than we see today. So it was the interventions of the international community and the priorities of the international community, war on terror, for instance, that influenced drastically what happened to Afghanistan and where we see Afghanistan today. But when President Karzai was elected into office, what he did was a part of this national consensus building, which also was a priority of the international community and also an element of democracy. If you want democracy in your country, then you need a national consensus. You need a government that is inclusive and representative. So in that effort, President Karzai brought into the government various individuals who used to be leaders of factional groups that fought in the civil war and who have played a prominent role in Afghanistan since. These individuals, most of whom are war criminals and warlords. But because they were used in the process to fight the Taliban, considering that the international community used a very light footprint approach early on, they were brought into the Afghan government as a form of creating a representative government and disarming their own private militias. At that point in time, the idea was that when we bring these individuals in the government, we will disarm them and that their constituencies will be responsive to a central government, meaning they will be transparent and they will be accountable. However, that did not happen. President Karzai was not able to control the individuals who he brought in, and nor was he able to gain the confidence or the trust of their constituencies. Therefore, what you saw was an Afghan government that whose different partners within the government had constituencies that were functioning independently, and no one responded to Karzai. This created a very weak government. That's why, I mean, many people used to refer to President Karzai as the president of Kabul. And it was for this factor that he was so weak. So what he did in return was refer back to those old client-patron relations. And he took stock of those, he re-established and re-strengthened them. By doing this, what he created was a parallel process to the formal structures of governance in Afghanistan. And so when you go back to old client-patron relations, something that we wanted to destroy from Afghanistan in order to instill democratic institutions and structures, what you do is you have now these two processes. This prevented the Afghan government from securing the nation. It led to rampant corruption in the Afghan government, and it led to the creation of various fiefdoms around the country. And so this, I would say, are also partially the reasons for many of the failures and the problems that we face today. It's the foundation of these problems. And I'll just end there for the sake of time.
Thank you. Of course, we are depriving your right to food, but there are few more who wants to ask questions. General, can I continue? Well, General Ashok Mehta.
On TAPI, if I can add, not only is there no gas, but there is also no money. No country is prepared to put in the $10 billion for TAPI. But my comment is on the presentation made by Professor Shobha Chandran, excellent regional perspective. My suggestion is that the trilateral initiative between India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka should become the framework of a regional maritime security architecture. I mean, his emphasis was on economics. I have absolutely no quarrel with that. But economics is linked with security. So the entire SLOC movement will depend on the security, and a lot of people have suggested some kind of a regional maritime structure. So that is something what can be considered. My question is for Mariam. The post-2014 Afghanistan. I think one of the facts that you need to consider is in the less optimistic scenario, which people now talk about because President Obama has advanced the date of withdrawal from what everybody believed would be 2024, the era of transformation, to 2016. Now, if that is the case, and there are these financial slip-ups, the security situation in Afghanistan could degenerate, and the spillover effect to the region, that I think is a regional problem. That spillover effect in a worrisome scenario, first to Pakistan, and then people who are inimical to India have already suggested that they will send their Taliban into Kashmir. So the real threat of a bad scenario is to the region. Sri Lanka is very lucky, as you, because geographically it is so distant from this spillover, and that is why you don't even have to invert the map for this, as somebody had suggested yesterday. Thank you.
I think it's a comment, so therefore, thank you for the comment. One last question. Yes, yeah.
I'll also keep it very short, sir. We've been talking about the problems with SAARC not taking off, trust deficit and everything. I just thought a way was a lot of sub-SAARC committees or organizations, because we have a typical situation where India is central, everybody has borders with us, but they don't have it amongst them. So we look at narrow aims or gains at the moment, focus on these, maybe Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, to that end may want to cooperate, and similarly to the West. So you bring up these small things like Maldives, Sri Lanka, India, and later on we could then carry it forward to a larger SAARC. So that was my suggestion.
Thank you for your comment. I think
I just wanted to add one comment that you made, sir. I completely agree with the point that you mentioned, that security for the region will be a significant issue post-2014, and one that deserves a further examination. But when we're talking about the spillover effects, which everybody talks about the spillover effects from Afghanistan, we need to also, and I'd like to add this to a point to what you mentioned, that also deserves consideration, is the spill-in effects. There's also a considerable amount of spill-in effects also in Afghanistan that we also need to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had a very good discussion, and maybe that discussion that is based on the regional imperatives is a good platform for the next session that is on global challenges. And because the region in today's globalizing world does not live in isolation, like mentioned by Mariam, there's spill-in effect in the region. There are certain things coming into the region over which we have no control over, including the interest shown in the Indian Ocean by the extra-regional powers. And whether we like it or not, that is the reality of today's world, or the modern world where we are connected. So we need to take that into account, and we need to adjust ourselves. So there is a need for a kind of a greater, since there's a strategic flux in the world today, since the Cold War was over, and there is no doctrines are not yet settled, and there are strategic flux. So that has impact on the region as well. So the region's effort to have a kind of a stable security architecture, both in maritime domain and the land domain, has not come about. I mean, if we can develop something like that in the region will have that much needed stability. We have not got there. But that is where we need to talk about these things, and that is the importance of having seminars of this nature. So I want to thank the Lieutenant General Ratnayaka for continuing with this tradition of having the seminar and giving the opportunity to discuss these issues in a platform where everybody can exchange views. So with that, I want to thank the panelists for taking part in this interesting discussion, and I want to thank all of you for listening, and thanks once again to the Army for having this seminar. Thank you.